order, and it's 2:37 p.m. It is Thursday, January 12th, 2012. New year. This is the AMATS Technical Advisory Committee meeting. Yeah, New Year. I'll look through the public involvement.
Sure.
I will.
Public involvement announcement. All of the AMATS meetings are public meetings. The public is welcomed and invited to comment. Business items and informational reports. The order of business will be, if we have presentations, it will be by staff or committee or consultants. The committee will then have an opportunity to discuss it, and at that point, we'll be invited to offer comments. So that's where we item.
All right, and now that everybody's settled, I'll go to the roll. Ms. Epstein is not here. Mr. Wilbur?
Here.
Mr. Weaver?
Here.
Mr. Carr is not here. Ms. Rice sitting in for Mr. Moore?
Here.
Mr. Morris?
Here.
Ms. Wick? Here. Ms. Willis here. Ms. Fowler's not here yet.
Here.
Mr. Hanson?
Here.
We do have quorum. So, next item is the approval of the agenda, and I heard that we have some requests for modifications.
Yes, Madam Chair, we're going to just a little bit. We have several presentations by folks who are here for only those specific items. And so what we'd like to do is move down and start with the ITS update. So it's an informational 6C, and then go through 6C, 6D, and 6E. And then we'll go back up to the business items. That way we'll get those folks on to do more productive stuff.
Does anybody on committee have any questions or comments about that?
John, I'm going to have to leave about 2 o'clock, just FYI.
Okay. We'll still have a quorum in your absence, so we'll still be able to act on the business items. If there's no issues with that from the committee, then we need to have a motion to change the agenda. I know. Are there any objections to changing the agenda as suggested? All right, hearing no objections, then item 6C, D, and E will actually be the first items. All right. And since we have no minutes to approve at this time,
Madam Chair, can I make a quick announcement on the minutes?
yes, sir.
We're still kind of, well, we're working out exactly how that we want to have the minutes so that the technical committee likes how they come out. The last set of minutes I did were a little too truncated, so we kind of filled them back in and got more information in there. I believe we are all caught up with the policy committee minutes, save for the December meetings. And for the technical committee minutes, I have, I think, about 8 or 9 sets of minutes that I'm working through. Trying to get them into the right form. My plan going out here would be that for business items, we make sure we have the motions in there and the bigger details, but for informational items, when we show them in the minutes, it will be a very brief synopsis, just in the interest of getting the minutes out and getting those creatures done. Our plan in the future is we currently have the recordings of the minutes. They're in the MP3 format, and so we're going to be posting those on the web in a place where folks can get to it. And Ms. Graves assures me that there will be the ability to, go to a specific agenda item. So in addition to the minutes, we'll have those as well, give them in the future. But so hopefully we'll be able to, once we get caught up and have the right format, several ways to get to the minutes so people can refer to them if they need to. So.
Thank you for the update. All right. With that, we're going to start with item 6C, the ITS update. Barb, where are you going to introduce?
Starts off.
Please identify yourself for the record.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Vivian Underwood. I'm staff to AMATS and Transportation Planning here at the Union. We have a guest speaker here today for you, and I'm going to introduce him in just a minute, but there are a couple of things I need to share with you first, and that is that the ITS architecture is due for an update. It's in our planning program for this year, and ITS, as some of you may know, it is using advanced technology in an integrated manner to improve the service transportation plan system, and the architecture is basically a framework for planning and implementing ITS. So we'll be doing that, and also we're going to be bringing to you a proposal to form a new ITS advisory subcommittee to the AMATS committees. And one of their main responsibilities will to serve as the technical team responsible for updating and maintaining the ITS architecture. So in the current draft Metropolitan Transportation Plan, there are some recommendations for improving travel time data collection, and the architecture is to be updated using real-time travel data collection. So along those lines, we have a guest speaker for you today, Dr. Miller, who's Associate Professor with UAA in the Traffic Engineering Systems, Computer Systems Engineering Department. He's been working with Teresa Brewer, who's on staff to AMATS and the Freight Advisory Committee, to track freight vehicles. Teresa mentioned this in a presentation she gave to you earlier on freight earlier this year. So I would like to introduce Dr. Miller to you and give you his presentation. Oh, sorry, technical difficulties.
Yeah, both lights are on, so it's just.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. As Vivian had mentioned, I have worked with Teresa Brewer as part of AMATS with some freight tracking. What I'm going to talk about today is a little more generic than that, and I'll talk briefly about the freight portion of the project as well. So I'm going to talk about current traffic assessment that we do in Anchorage, what I'm proposing with distributed traffic gathering, determining the time to traverse the roadway based on GPS data, and then a few future projects that seem rather exciting, at least in my opinion. So right now, the ways that we gather traffic in Anchorage, we have some cameras. This was actually from Juneau, but we have some cameras positioned, loop detectors, air tubes that we see during summer months, driver call-ins. Sometimes drivers call in when we don't want them to. We have some people who will just sit, DOT and the Muni will have people just counting traffic and so on at different intersections. And we've just recently started putting up, the DOT has the road weather information system towers. This is the one at Bird Point, I believe. And what I've proposed here is, instead of just gathering traffic at these individual locations, that we gather them from a distributed fleet of the vehicles. We can install devices in vehicles. They can transmit their GPS location, their speed, and a number of different pieces of data along with that data to some central server for real-time processing of the data. The way that it works, the cars will communicate with GPS satellites to get their location. They communicate with some kind of roadway infrastructure, whether this is the cellular network or whether this is using the Wi-Fi, or if we have some citywide infrastructure which is able to handle this. This is some kind of a structure which then gives us connection back to some central infrastructure, and this is communicating with a database server which stores all the data for historical purposes so that we can run queries on a lot of the data from the past as well. This is already set up. I'm currently doing this with 65 vehicles that we have in the Anchorage area, and we're also going to be installing these devices in some of the freight vehicles as well. This is transmitting through the cellular network right now. I have been fortunate to strike up a deal with GCI that they are funding this research as well, and their contribution to it is free data on their network. So all of the devices that we have are transmitting over GCI's network back to the central infrastructure, and fortunately we have no cost, which was one of the concerns with this project because there's always a perpetual cost with transmitting over the cellular network. So that was a great contribution that GCI has provided for us. Here's what the tracking device looks like. It's very small. It plugs in through the vehicle's onboard diagnostic port. This will work for any vehicle from years 1996 and newer, which at that point is when the federal government required vehicles to have onboard diagnostic ports. For the freight vehicles, they don't use the same OBD or OBD2 connector. They use a J1939 connector. It's round, a little bit bigger. There's adapters that'll connect directly from this into the freight vehicles, though. We also have some cell phone apps. We have an iPhone app, a BlackBerry app, and an Android app that do essentially the same thing. We've run into some complications with those, specifically with the iPhone and the BlackBerry, that when the program is running in the background, meaning that it's not the current application which is up and running on the phone, it's not able to transmit data any longer. So if we have the application up and running on the phone, transmits data perfectly, and it works just like the device that's inside of the vehicle, just not connected through the OBD port. Android, on the other hand, allows us to transmit the data continuously from the phone, even when it's not the primary application. The reason behind that is that the data usage on the phone is going to go up substantially because we could have it transmitting 10 times a second if we really wanted, and if the application's running in the background, the user may not realize how much data they're using, as well as the battery life is going to go down if you're transmitting that frequently. And so that's the reason for those limitations. So hopefully in the newer versions of the OS and the phones, they'll change that or put some kind of a limitation where you can only transmit once every X seconds, and we can get away with having it running in the background. There are privacy concerns with having your vehicle tracked. I've tried to get around those concerns. The data which is transmitted does have a unique identifier associated with it, but this ID is not associated with a vehicle, it's not associated with a driver. These devices have been given out on a volunteer basis, and when I've distributed them to the drivers, I've specifically not written down the ID of the device that I've given to a specific person. The reason for that is because I didn't want to be able to track individual people. I didn't want to have the problem of law enforcement coming to me and saying, can you tell me where this vehicle is? My honest answer to them, if they were to come to me right now, is no, I can't. I can tell you where this device was, though. I don't know what vehicle that device was in. I have no idea who was actually driving that vehicle at the time. But I can tell you where that device was because I have a unique identifier associated with it. In addition to that, I'm only interested in the main arterials and not residential streets. We only have a small sample of the population. It doesn't do me any good if I know that one car drove down one of the side streets at 25 miles an hour at 4 p.m. That doesn't tell me what the flow of traffic is like on that roadway. It tells me nothing about that except at that one specific instance in time. In addition, I don't ever expose the location of the devices. We aggregate the data, which I'll show you on a future slide, to display what the flow of traffic is, rather than the individual locations of the vehicles. Here's who are currently being tracked right now. We have smartphones since December of 2009. It's a little bit longer than this. I didn't update this one slide here. I have somewhere around 1.5 million data points that I'm gathering. These devices are transmitting data every 10 seconds. And so we collect all of the data. I've actually run some queries for some of the reports here at the municipality saying, can you tell me what the average speed was on Tudor between the hours of 7 a.m. and 9 a.m.? And I can do that based on all of the data that I have. And it may not be every single day that I had vehicles driving down that, but when you look at it over a 16-month period or 18-month period, it gets pretty decent results. Here's the application that I have. It's put up online. It's at alaskatraffic.net is the URL for it. I display different colors on the map based on what the average speed is along that section of the roadway. If the average speed is greater than 75% of what the speed limit is on that roadway, I give it a marking of green. If it's between 50 and 75% of the speed limit, it gets a yellow. If it's between 25 and 50%, it gets an orange. And if it's less than 25% of the speed limit, then it'll get a red line on there. This data will stay up here for 30 minutes. If a vehicle doesn't drive along that section of the roadway for 30 minutes, I then take it down, and that's why there's some areas over here, like on the Seward Highway, that have nothing at this specific moment in time. I wanted to make sure that the data that was being displayed was not stale. that it was still current. On the other hand, only having 65 vehicles being tracked, we obviously don't have a representation of the entire city of Anchorage at all times. During rush hour, we do pretty well, though. You see, I get pretty good readings along the Glen. I've strategically chosen people who drive in from the valley, and so during rush hour, we get some good readings on the Glen and also coming down the Seward Highway, and you see people coming through and cutting down because there are a number of people who work at the university that have volunteered. So we get some good data through this area up in here as well. If you put your mouse over the top of one of those lines, it's going to tell you a lot of information. It's going to tell you what that roadway section is, tell you what the distance is on it, what the current speed on it is, when that was reported. So you can look at that and say, oh, well, that was reported 28 minutes ago. Maybe it's not as accurate, or that was reported 1 or 2 minutes ago. So that's probably pretty accurate. It'll tell you how long it's going to take you to drive along that section of the roadway at the current speed, tell you what the speed limit is and how long it would take you to drive it if people were driving at the current speed limit as well. We're trying to assess the length of time that we have up there for how long it's going to still remain accurate or not. The project is free and open source. It's been downloaded by other universities and by departments of transportation around the world, and they use it for different purposes and modify the code and so on. I'm not profiting on this. This is part of my obligation as a researcher at the university. We also have determined travel times along certain arterials. We aggregate the data for different reports and so on. The way that we determine this, just real briefly, one way is using a speed model where we're just looking at the speed of a car and we're saying whatever speed was reported by that vehicle is what we're going to assume the average speed on that roadway section is. Obviously, you can see that there would be problems with that, especially in non-free flowing roads such as the ones where we have traffic signals and stop signs, because if a vehicle transmits its speed as it's coming to a stop at the stoplight, we don't want to say the average speed was 5 miles an hour on that roadway. The proportional model is an algorithm that we came up with, which is not using speed at all. It's using time and using the location at which the vehicle has transmitted the point. So if they transmit before they get onto that section of the roadway and then they transmit after they get off of that section of the roadway, we can then interpolate and figure out and have a pretty good estimate of how long it took to drive along that section of the roadway. We did an analysis of the air factor using the two different algorithms. And if we had 10-second vehicle transmission, so the devices were transmitting every 10 seconds, we were only off by an air factor of somewhere around 2.7%. And so that's rather accurate when you're thinking about 45 miles an hour. 2.7% means that we're off by somewhere around, I don't know, less than 10 miles an hour. When you take this over the long run, you can see down here we had another study, number of seconds between here was the percentage was 1.8%, and this was the number of seconds. We were off by 2.7 seconds was the average number of seconds that we were off from the transmission. Obviously, as the number of seconds between vehicle transmission goes up, we have a higher error rate, but then we also have lower data usage on the network. Some current and future projects, which is what I want to kind of focus on now. What I've shown you so far is what we're already doing. We're continuing to do. We're adding more devices. We're going to add these into the freight vehicles as well, because the trucking companies are very interested in figuring out how they can then improve the their flow of traffic of their vehicles. So tracking the freight vehicles, determining locations of delay. The Freight Advisory Committee had a study performed where they had the freight drivers fill out a survey of what the intersections were that they thought were the worst or the busiest or needed the most work. And using these devices, we're hopefully going to validate that study and see that it's not just the perception of the drivers, but it's the reality that those are the areas where the drivers spend the most amount of time or they have the most congestion. Aggregating all the data we can in real time to provide a single interface. I don't think that this is the end-all and be-all solution to gathering traffic data. I think that we take all of those other methods that I had at the very beginning and we need to put them all together, and I think this is where the municipality and the state DOT can really come in and work together, hopefully with us at the university as well, to provide a single interface for all of the data that we have. Determining fastest pass in real time, notifying drivers of the fastest way to get to their desired destinations. That would be really nice as I was driving over here today and all the snow and so on and the congestion and the school buses coming up Elmore at the same time that I was, which slowed me down some. It would be nice if we could notify people and say this is the fastest way to get to where you want to go and this is how long it's going to take. Academic problems, there's a lot of different academic problems. This is a huge distributed network, and so there's a lot of problems like the traveling salesman problem, which is we have someone who needs to get from here and they have to visit a number of locations before they come back. This is like the FedEx and the UPS problem. So how do we deliver all of our packages and get back to our starting location in the least amount of time? If we have data for all of the traffic on the roadways and we can predict what the traffic is going to be throughout the day, we can try to solve problems like that as well. Reducing the cost for the devices through vehicle-to-vehicle to infrastructure, aggregation algorithms, Wi-Fi, other forms of wireless. We have the 5.9 gigahertz band, 75 megahertz that has been allocated to us by the FCC for specifically vehicular communication. We also have 802.11p, which is a form of Wi-Fi that we could use as well. What I'm using right now is the cellular network, but there's these other technologies which may be able to give us more granular data or vehicle-to-vehicle direct communication rather than having to go through the cellular infrastructure before you talk to another vehicle. And that'll give us information from vehicles directly to us that are more centralized, or more localized to where we are, if we have vehicles communicating with each other directly. One of the current projects that we have right now is determining the location of vehicle slippage. We have these devices, and we're going to be putting them in a couple of probe vehicles, reading from the OBD port the locations where the vehicle's analog braking system kicks in. And during winter, whenever ABS kicks in, chances are that means that you're sliding. And that would be a location of slippage on the roadway. So we have devices that are reading the ABS data from the OBD port, and we're transmitting that back to our server. And what we want to do is display these nice little blue dots or something like that, which is going to give us some information about this is a slippery location. We would like to also be able to work with the city and with the DOT to give that information to the sand trucks and so on, so that we know, what, these are some slippery locations, and we all probably know what they are, but this is going to validate it, right? Lake Otis coming up to Tudor, that little hill there is usually pretty slick, and we know this, and that's why there's usually sand that's dispatched to that spot early in the days. In addition to that, I've just read this last week, 2 different articles about tracking snowplows. The city of New York, after their big snowfall last year, the mayor said he wants to be able to track snowplows so that people can see the roads that have been plowed, and the city of Chicago is also doing this. With us living in Alaska, I think that this is something that can really also put us on the map. If we're tracking snowplows and we display it on the map, these are the roads that have been plowed, and this is also a safety concern for people, so that you know what roads have been plowed. When you get up, you look at the map in the morning and say, oh, I know that this road's already been plowed. That's the way that I'm going to go to work, rather than taking another way that hasn't been plowed yet. We're working currently with the snowplows that we have on campus for a proof of concept, just to get them working, and after that we're hoping that we can set up some meetings with the DOT and with the Muni to talk about possibly putting them in the plows owned by them. And I was told to try to make it quick. I'm sorry I talked fast, but are there any questions?
It's pretty exciting. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions. John, the information that Dr. Miller showed, did we use any of this when we were putting together the MTP, when we were trying to validate the information that we have in our plan and some of the research that he's done? Did we use any for the on-time or in the congestion or in the state of the systems report?
Yeah, actually, I think I talked to Dr. Miller about a year and a half ago, I think, before, while we were developing the last status system report. I think there are some potential applications for this type of system or travel time system for the status system report. And just to remind Dr. Miller, is what we did on a regular basis, every 4 years, we put together a report that tries to assess how we're doing in terms of traffic congestion and whatever. We look at level service at intersections. We also have a travel time survey we do, which is a pilot car, old-fashioned pilot car system where you drive up and down the road and you collect data during the morning and afternoon and the midday period. We'd like to do something a little bit more 21st century eventually, because it's very time-consuming and costly, and something that has more of an ongoing type of data basis. But it would be nice to not just throw away the old data, but to be able to utilize this and compare it with our historic data, which goes back to '98, and only certain periods of time, like in the fall, is when we collect it. And we're very interested, I think, in trying to work with you on integrating this into our regular traffic data collection system.
If you want, let's hear the municipality on street maintenance would be interested in it, but if you need somebody to start a conversation, give me a call, or I can get a hold of Alan Chkowski.
All right. Thank you.
Be interested.
Any other questions or comments from the committee? Anything from the public?
I have a question for Vivian later,
Later?
well, before you get off this topic.
I just have a comment. There's a system like this in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I was in San Francisco trying to figure out how to get to the Oakland airport. It was really helpful to know whether I'd be slowed down at all. It's, in the future, it could be great.
Mr. Morris?
Yeah, I just wondered, if you look at intersection delay as well, I mean, there's speeds, but if you look at, how well specific intersections are performing in terms of.
As in signal timing?
Well, just how much time people are spending in intersection, they have to spend one queue or two queues, or.
So I haven't specifically run those queries, but having all of the historical data, there's no reason why we can't.
Any other questions?
Oh, no, thank you so much, Dr. Murray.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Marmalade. With State DOT, the question is part of the agenda item was to talk about the update of ITS architecture. And maybe it's a question doesn't need to be answered, but for the record, it'd be nice to have the question mentioned. And the question is, what is the status of signing the TOR for the architecture update?
Thank you for that question. I have to defer to Craig Williams because I honestly don't know. He's been handling it for the past 6 months, and I don't know if it's in legal services or, is he here?
He's right here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm still working with the meeting manager to get that finished, so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You want to the rest of our...
Just one more question. What's your ideal number of monitors in Anchorage? What would you like to see?
Everyone. That's a good question. I get asked this question a lot. How many vehicles do I think are needed so that we have an accurate representation of the roadway system? And I start from the highest point and say, I don't think that we need every single vehicle, because if two cars are driving next to each other, I don't think I need data from each of them. Now, how many do we need? That's a good question. I would just be taking a guess, and I can if you'd like, but I don't have a straight answer for you on that.
The more the better.
Well, I was just, what I would be interested in is, how you're funding it and when you think you might have a really good representation.
Well, it depends on what we're trying to do.
Right.
If we're trying to get a good representation of the flow of traffic and all the main arterials at all times of the day, then we need more. If you're looking to see, what over the course of a 12-month period, what was the average speed on Tudor between 7 and 9 a.m., I think we can already do that.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So, just a quick question. Do you know if the Eagle River interchange and North Access need to use the projector for
The
anything?
Eagle River one does.
It does? Okay. Then I'm going to stay here, that's why I was asking. All right. So any other final questions or comments, or are we good to move on to the next? We're good to move on. Okay, so moving on to actually item 6D, the Eagle River Interchange Study. Ms. Bard, do you please present this?
Yeah, just really quick. From time to time, DOT undertakes a preliminary study or reconnaissance report. A lot of times those don't come back to this committee, but it's essentially maybe a first step in project development before the project gets into the tip. 30,000-foot view of the feasibility of a project. So we have two that we want to present today, the Eagle River Interchange Study and then the UMed reconnaissance report. So I head over to Jerry Welsh from our preliminary design engineering section.
Hand it over. Bring, I need a remote.
Yeah.
That's it. Best of luck.
Please introduce yourself for the record.
It's got a laser beam in it.
I
I think so.
don't know. There you
Yes.
This is not as polished a presentation, I apologize, but then again, I only have a bachelor's degree.
Please introduce yourself for the record, just so we have it on there.
My name's Jerry Welsh. I'm a project manager in the preliminary design and environmental section at the Central Region office. My boss isn't here, but my boss's boss is. We were, is that enough? You don't need to know anything more about me?
No, you're good.
We were asked to conduct a study of sorts of the Eagle River interchanges. There was a legislative request to solve some problems on the interchanges out there, probably because of some complaints. We get those complaints, and so do the legislators. And my bosses decided that it would be a good idea for us to, instead of take the money that was appropriated and start doing something, to look at what might be appropriate to do. And I've been asked to brief you on this study. I wouldn't call it a full-blown reconnaissance, but let me start off with telling you what my objectives here are. Don't push the battery signal. I'm going to briefly describe the origins of the study. I'll tell you what the study's objectives are. I'll list the primary operational problems. I won't go too into depth in this rather esoteric study. It's got a lot of very boring language in it, unlike the previous talk. I'll describe the alternatives we looked at, and I want to say up front that these were very conceptual, not a great deal of design went into them. And then I'll summarize the study's conclusions and recommendations. As I said, a legislator, I don't recall which one, but then again, he doesn't talk directly to me, brought up some money, and Kim could probably answer those questions about the money better than I, but there's been a lot of complaints on the interchanges at Highland and Artillery roads. Our objectives in the study were to document the existing conditions and identify problems at those two interchanges, and to analyze expected future conditions. We did some simple forecasting with growth rates on traffic numbers, and we developed a range of potential alternatives that would address some of the level of service issues out there. And let's see, we would see what those things would cost at a planning level cost estimate. We didn't do real detailed construction cost estimates. And we were also thought we might throw in some discussion about the discontinuity in the pathways and the absence of well-developed park and ride facilities. I'm going to guess everyone here knows when I talk about level of service what I'm talking about, but a level of service A is like a mark in school. It's real good. There's free flow of traffic all the way down to F, which is failure. I mean, that's gridlock or bumper to bumper, not performing well and erratic, like an F student. I want to emphasize that level of service analysis has its limitations. It's good for spot looking. It's not traffic modeling. I can't tell you how an improvement at one intersection would, or one interchange would affect upstream or downstream. It's kind of a superficial look, but it does help us evaluate the efficacy of certain improvements. And system modeling before anything should go forward probably should be a priority. We did not look at the central business district model too closely on this thing. It's a little beyond the scope of our study. So I'm managing your expectations, I hope. Well, the problem out there is the long queues, and primarily, our chief source of complaint is the long queues on the southbound ramps coming toward town at both Highland and Artillery. People feel frustrated because of the way those interchanges are congested in the mornings. Congestion, slowdown, occasional failure, exiting. The northbound traffic in the PM peak is also a problem, but not to the degree that the morning is. We don't hear as much about that. And again, driver frustration and those delays can lead to some crashing problems. It's a good idea for me here to point out that the MTP currently has projects that are relevant to this study. There's a short-term project to add an additional lane in each direction between Highland and Artillery. That would bring that up to a total of 6 lanes. There's also a project to look that says add a partial interchange at Farm Avenue, which is north of Artillery but south. It's about halfway between Artillery and North Eagle River. There's a long-term project to add HOV lanes all the way from Boniface out to Artillery, which would make an 8-lane highway through the area of interest for this study. I wasn't trying to slip those past you, that's what I just said, so I didn't hit the button. Let's see here. That's the Highland Road interchange. And there's 2 arrows on there with the existing conditions on those levels of service at the intersection at the top of the ramp, and then at the merge going towards town and north to the right. These are the chief source of complaint. And what's happening is the traffic is queuing up on Highland. Anybody who drives it knows, I'm sure Jennifer can attest to the validity of those arrows being in the right place.
Or does it back up on Highland? This one? I deliberately avoid it in the winter time because, but just yesterday morning, my husband took it and it took 20 minutes to get to the interchange. Just so you're backed up all the way from Eagle River Road at times in bad weather to the interchange.
If you'll take note of the fact that the level of service on the merge is worse than at the intersection, so we're getting to a very relevant point in a moment. This slide is intended to show that if the ultimate long-term project of 8 lanes were put in place today, or in 2010 when I had traffic, the level of service problems at this interchange would evaporate. And that's instructive because it means the problems we're having on the interchange are directly related to the capacity problems on the Glen Highway. And I'm giving you the bottom line of the study about a third of the way through this talk. Now, I didn't explain that very well, I guess. That current D ain't no longer there even out of 2033 with the projected traffic, with just the improvements in capacity on the highway. I don't know if I'm saying that clearly or not, but I understand it. That's the important thing. The build concepts that we looked at for Highland are a 2-lane southbound on-ramp, a jug handle southbound on-ramp, and a southbound flyover. And the reason we looked at a flyover, and I'll explain that in a minute, that's just doubling the ramp and extending the merge up to about the scales, maybe a little past, depending upon what would be available. there's a jug handle that looks just like what you got on at Artillery right now. That would, and I want to try to avoid too thorough a discussion of what effects these have on level of service, because I can kind of tell you in sort of blatant, blunt terms that after having gone to the trouble of having my people develop these and analyzing them, I realized what we were doing, we were still trying to squeeze 10 pounds of stuff into a 5-pound bag. Everything we do falls apart as soon as you get on the Glen. The Glen is just not prepared to take the traffic that any of these would. There may be some level of service improvements at the various movements on the interchanges, but they don't do anything once you get down to the, you just make a bigger straw go into a small straw. And let me point out, I wasn't going to do this, but I'll do it anyway. If you put in this flyover, you relieve delay for a lot of minor movements. Small movements. In the morning, what's happening right there is these people are taking a left here, and these people who are coming up on the southbound off-ramp and wanting to go into Eagle River this way are dependent upon the mercies of the people to let them go. And so they've got a level of service F there, but there's only 100 vehicles doing it. So there's not enough squeaky wheels there to justify the cost of that, probably. I won't get into that either. Let's talk about Artillery for a minute. There's a jug handle there that's got a level of service A in the morning peak currently. And there's a merge right there that's got the same level of service as the merge at Highland. And that's instructive because you've got a level of service A here that gets right down to a level of service D. So what's happening is these people are feeling probably better about getting on the backup, getting onto the highway. But they're not getting on the highway any faster than those people at Highland. And I highlight this because we've got a level of service B through the analysis, but this thing backs up not because of the intersection service level of service here, but because of the confusion created by all this. And I point that out because some of the concepts that we looked at try to give an idea of what it would cost and what it would look like if we were to fix that mess right there. Well, everybody who's been out there knows it. This is another expression of the fact that if the MTP projects were built, the level of service problems at this interchange would go away without any improvements to the interchange. That's what the analysis shows anyway. And that's, again, I just want to highlight the bottom line of this study says that if you add capacity to the Glen, a lot of the complaints go away. A lot of the operational problems go away. We looked at 4 concepts here. Again, these are very preliminary and conceptual and not anything that's carved in stone. So if any of the public sees their house getting blown away by one of these, I'd implore them not to yell at me. We look at a 2-lane southbound on-ramp, a relocated northbound off-ramp, roundabouts at ramps, and a complete reconfiguration, including a southbound flyover. That's just doubling the jug handle. Probably requires some substantial bridge work. That's described more thoroughly in the report, as are these all. This is a more elaborate setup to try to relieve some of the problems with the confusion here at the Eagle River Artillery. It would do away with the current ramp. That green is obliterated. This is just a different take on that same thing without roundabouts. There's one with the flyover. And we put cost to all these to give you kind of an idea of what any of these solutions might cost. The half interchange at Farm Avenue might look something like this, and this is for people heading to town and people coming back from town, not allowing access from the north into that residential area. It's got issues of its own, but we do make some recommendations, but they're not real adamant recommendations. If something were to be done, it would be in the $10 million range at each interchange, and they would be Band-Aids. They're the most cost-effective action for improvement. They would only be short-term. When they would fall apart is probably at about the year your short-term projects on the MTP would go into place. So there has to be some thought given to that. The entire system has to be modeled. We did not have the information available to us to gauge the impact of one improvement on another interchange if that interchange were not improved, in the many iterations that have to do with an improved interchange becoming an attractor to traffic and people deciding to head north before they head south, that kind of thing. So that's something that really needs to be a priority. We could not tell you whether the Farm Road interchange would benefit in the long term for those same reasons. So modeling there would be a good idea. Anything that's done needs to take into account the MTP projects, and the pathway discontinuity and the park and ride needs need to be looked at closely because they're a concern with the public too, and they're a source of complaint. The bottom line is there are no long-term improvements for commuters from interchange improvements. If you don't add capacity to the Glen Highway, there's not much you can do to the interchanges out there to fix the problem. And unless you reduce the number of vehicles, the only way you're going to help is to add lanes. And that is all I got to say, unless you got questions.
I have a couple things to add, and that is, there was $5 million through the legislation to do this study. We spent very little money, and the reason I wanted the AMATS particularly here, to be educated on what's going on, is that we're going to recommend that funds be put back to the CBD district out there rather than spend any more money on time on the interchanges. So I just wanted AMATS to be aware of what's going on with that, and why, the information as to why, what's happening with the system.
Are there any other questions from the committee? Oh, Mr. Hudson?
Just a comment. Last legislative session, we got $3 million, I think it was, something like that, to 2.5, something like that, to do some work at the Artillery Road, Eagle River Lane intersection. And one of the projects, the main projects they wanted to look at is making the connection from that intersection directly over to Business Boulevard. We are in the process right now of selecting a consultant. We just had oral interviews 2 days ago, so we're very close to making that selection to have that looked at.
Any other questions from the committee?
I have one for Jerry. Jerry, so in your recommendation, I mean, really the thing we ought to be doing is if we had money to put on the solution ought to be adding lanes on the southbound Glen, at least from Artillery through and across the bridge. We'd have to add another bridge expansion to get up to the other side, the south side of the bridge, which already has 3 lanes going southbound.
Well, I would leave it to just policymakers to make that decision. Certainly that would improve things. What AMATS should do is not something I'm
just asking from a solution perspective, if we were to advance to the next step on the idea based on what you found on the reconnaissance study, it appears that, as you so eloquently put it, we're trying to put 10 tons of stuff in a 5-ton bag. If we provided a 10-ton bag, we might be able to solve our problem.
I'm confident you add capacity to southbound Glen, the problem is relieved.
Before Rachel goes, are there any other questions or comments from the committee? No? All right, from Go ahead.
Sorry, what effect does the limited capacity on the bridge, the overpass itself, have on the congestion and the backup on Highland or Eagle River Loop in particular? You have going southbound, on the southbound ramp, you have to go over the bridge, and it's a one-lane traffic. Say if you improve the ramp to 2 lanes and extend the weaving and even add capacity on the Glen, isn't there still a bottleneck on the bridge when you go from one lane over the bridge to you're turning left? Isn't that
That is really the reason I think an amount of money was appropriated was with the belief that widening that bridge or somehow reconfiguring the bridge would help. But the fact that the level of service on the merge is worse than the level of service on the turn left is counter to that. Now, it might feel better to be waiting on the ramp than it does on the bridge. Now, I recognize that. And I won't say that if you put an additional lane on the bridge and an additional lane and then brought them together, the 2 lanes together on the existing ramp, that a car wouldn't get on the highway a few cars ahead of where he might have. But I can't demonstrate in the level of service analysis. The fact is, you're just going to be waiting a little further downstream, is what happens if you do that. That's what our analysis shows.
Basically like racing to a red light. You're getting there faster, but you're still stopping.
It's actually serving to meter the traffic.
Yeah.
But the restriction there is just metering the traffic a little bit. If you look at the artillery where the jug handle is, those people are not having to wait to turn left because they go right and they go under. But they're getting down into that merge and they're in the same pickle with the people at Highland.
I do have one other comment too, and that is, if you're going to sacrifice, in places where they have congestion problems on things like the Glen Highway, they put in metering systems, so you can't get on too quickly. We have a natural metering system. If we added lanes, that metering system goes away and we've got a bunch of people backed up on added lanes on the ramp. So we would always sacrifice the side streets for the main line. That's just kind of how traffic engineering works. And it's sacrificing side streets right now. Is what's happening.
Ms. Brooks?
Yeah, I just had a question on putting the rest of the money into the CBD study. Are you thinking about aligning some of the intersections on Old Glen so that we have better pedestrian safety capacity?
It's towards projects on the CBD, and it's really not up to us, it's up to the legislature. But what we're saying is, we can take that $5 million and try to do something with it, but we don't think we've accomplished much.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments?
I do have one, Kim Skipper.
You say Kim Skipper?
Kim Skipper. You said the southbound going toward Anchorage's Works and the northbound going back to Eagle River. So when Jerry made the comment about the $2.5 million to look at this, going straight when you're coming home, going north, and take the Eagle River exit and straight across to Business Boulevard, has anything been looked at about the level of service after that would be complete?
Tell me again exactly what you're talking about. I heard the question, but I didn't hear the interchange you're talking about.
It's the artillery interchange. So when you're coming back north and you take the Eagle River exit, instead of having to go right toward downtown, you go straight to Business Boulevard instead of turning right. Would that alleviate?
The expensive ones would alleviate. If you straighten out that mess there, you're going to spend $25 million or more dollars. What we tried to do here was to respect the fact that we had a few $1 million to throw at this problem, and to see if there was something we could do for a few $1 million. But we did develop these alternatives that solve the problem you're talking about and others, the reduced levels of service. Now, I did not bring hard copies of this report. My successor has a bunch of hard copies of her report. The reason I don't have hard copies is because I'm editing this thing as we speak. I know I'm going to change something when I get back to the office. I do have it posted online. And the analysis you're wanting to see is in that report. And the very tall planner here, Bart, will can direct you to that. I didn't put my contact information up here, and that was an oversight. That wasn't intentional, trying to duck questions or anything, but
The link is posted to the agenda online, the AMATS agenda.
And essentially, the report with this presentation, review, please. That was the intent.
yeah, I can't answer that specific question right now with any specific.
Anything else?
Okay, does the Northern Access UMed presentation need the overhead? No? All right.
Thanks, Jerry.
Ready for the next one?
Pardon? I know that was hard.
Thank you, Jerry.
It's my pressure. It's a pleasure.
I thought he said pleasure, but I'm not sure that's what he meant.
Mr. Wheeler left us and Mr. Wheeler joined us. So, okay.
I am Kelly Peterson, the project manager for DOT, the Northern Access to the University Medical District Reconnaissance Study Report. This report was prepared by DOT on behalf of the municipality to analyze circulation and access in the new UMed district. Our consultant for this project was here in May. I think most of you were here to see their presentation. They had a PowerPoint and went over the details of the report in progress. And I'm here today to present the final reports to the AMATS committee. So if you've got, everyone has a report there. A reconnaissance study is a planning level document. It describes the problem, develops a preliminary purpose and need, identifies and analyzes alternative solutions, compares the alternatives, and recommends alternatives for further evaluation. So if I could direct your attention to the page behind the signature page called the Notice to Reader. We included this notice to make it clear to readers of the report that this project has been in the AMATS planning queue for quite some time. The purpose of the report is to provide background information and stakeholder concerns to the AMATS board. And the next steps are up to AMATS in pursuing a project and in what fashion that would be taken in. Ordinarily, when DOT produces a reconnaissance study, it's a desktop exercise with very limited public involvement. As you turn to page 11, you will see our public participation for this document was very enhanced. There's a list here of the area institutions, stakeholders, utilities, and the 5 community councils that received presentations and updates throughout the development of this report. If you would turn to page 42, you will see the map of conceptual roadway improvements that were evaluated in the document. And they're alphabetized A through I. On page 78, presents the analysis criteria and alternatives recommended to be carried forward. In developing the alternatives, we really looked at 3 strategies to reduce traffic demand, to improve existing roadways, and to construct new access into the area. So as you can see from page 78, the ones recommended for further analysis are the are G, I, J, and K. So this report was complete in September. And at that time, we posted it to the project website and sent an email notice out to the email list, letting people know that there was a 30-day comment period to review the final report. And the comments that we received are included here as Appendix A. We received 43 comments on the report. 12 of them were positive for a project, 18 were against any project in the area. 7 people wrote in letting the project team know about certain resources they felt were important to preserve, and 6 people had questions about the report or the website. And they're all included as Appendix A. In the back of the report is a disc that has all the supporting documents and an electronic copy of this report. The supporting documents, in this case, we have an extensive traffic analysis, a geotechnical memo, hydrology and drainage memo, noise analysis, a phase 1 site assessment, scoping summary report, and a wetlands assessment. And those are all included on this disc in the back. So with that,
Yes. Now, Kelly, was this a $2 million legislative appropriation? Is that the source of funding for this study? $2 million. And I don't know how much is left, but the point, I guess, is that this is not a project that's currently it's in the MTP, but it's not currently on our list of moving forward in the TIP. I don't know where this project scores as far as the TIP goes, but our point is, as far as we're concerned, as with the objective of what we were given with the legislation and the funding, is we're complete. This is all that we were intended to do, or asked to do, and it's up to the policymakers from this point on to determine what to do with the study. And so that's kind of why we're here, to give you the conclusion. That, and it is very rare to do as much public involvement as we did. There was a lot of people who complained about the process, when in fact, generally, there is no public involvement process in this kind of study.
Are there any other questions or comments from the committee?
I have one. Kelly, and I have to step out for a second. So does the reconnaissance, I see the list of recommendations, I see the map on 42, and I see the table on 75 with the cost. Does the recon study narrow it down or pick one or two?
78.
78?
78 shows the criteria and which ones we're recommending carrying forward.
Okay.
The bottom line is the ones moving forward.
My own little consumer report of road projects.
Yeah, we don't do one thing in a sentence
I like
anymore.
that. I know it. Okay, thank you, Kelly.
Ms. Epstein?
I just have a comment, and I'm glad there was a big public process. I hear about this from the public all the time, this project, and I think, in terms of going forward, we should really consider that there were some very extensive and heartfelt public comments about this project, and a lot of opposition, things that don't usually come up, dog park areas, trail areas that would be disrupted, and I think we're going to have to be very thoughtful about proceeding on this, and it's great. The comments are interesting, and the numbers don't tell the whole story, the 12 for and 18 against, because you have some very detailed comments that are opposed to it.
Any comments or questions from the public?
Very nice.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Kelly. So now we're going back up to the business item.
Let's do that.
Okay. So now we are moving back up the list to item 5A, the 2035. Do you have any action items? Quick presentation.
Just an update, a regular update. Thank you, Madam Chair. Since the last TAC meeting, the Planning and Zoning Commission held a public hearing on the public hearing draft. It was last Monday, actually, January 9th. It was, the public hearing was opened and it was closed. The Planning and Zoning Commission, however, decided to postpone the formal motion of their recommendation until the 30th of this month. Just for your information, that's fine as far as our schedule is concerned. I think we can start the assembly introduction on February 14th, and proceed in that direction. We'll get our plan adopted by the policy committee prior to the deadline of June 30th. So not concerned at this point with that postponement. At the public hearing, there was about 5 people testified. The 4 of the 5 testified against the Connect Arm Crossing project. There were several also that complained about the public hearing notification and the lack of time they felt to make comments. Just for some background, I feel that we met the requirements that are called for and by the Planning and Zoning Commission as well as AMATS. It was advertised according to 21 days prior to the public hearing. We did send out something, I think a source of confusion among the public was a last minute email notification, reminder really of the public hearing. Some people saw that, felt, well, that's a little late. It should have reminded us earlier. They thought that was the only notification that was out there. But in fact, I think you'll see from our record that we started notifying the public of that date when we issued the public review draft of the document back in October. And at the public meetings in October and at subsequent public meetings, we've always made sure that a copy of the schedule was handed out. Couple comments came in a little bit late that since you approved it and released it to the policy committee, and the policy committee released it, a couple things came up. Another comment from the Subversive Board was laid on the table. They have some concerns about some of their previous comments that weren't incorporated into the plan. I just want you to know about that because they'll probably come back at a future date and you'll have to make another decision regarding whether or not to incorporate those comments into the final draft or recommend approval of those comments. Primarily, they were concerned about some of the policies that were in the old plan, the old Subversive plan, rather Shugapi River plan that weren't incorporated. And you see in the response summary, we did address those previously. But they came back and they were still asking for reconsideration of those policies to be included. We can go over that at a later date if you like. In addition, the planning section of the municipality had a couple of comments, recommendations for addition of a new policy that they would like to see incorporated into the plan. And I have a copy of that. I don't know if you want to deal with it now. I think maybe at a later date we'll have to deal with it. But I'm just notifying you that this will be something new that we'll have to consider at a future date. It's primarily related to a policy that they would like to see future land use plans and sub-area plan recommendations related to transportation incorporated in the design of projects, or at least evaluated and considered as part of the design of a project. For instance, the Government Hill plan, community council plan is currently ongoing, and they probably anticipate some recommendations regarding the Connect Arm Crossing, what we're calling a trench and cover or cut and cover tunnel, and how to utilize the land above the cut and cover in the future to help integrate the neighborhood. They would like, that's one of the examples they use, how they would like to use the local planning documents to give some direction to some of the design issues that they'll be facing in future transportation projects. Is that clear? But so that'll be coming up in the future. One other notice item: we did publish the public hearing draft, and we distributed it to the Planning and Zoning Commission. I would give you your own copies today. However, we've discovered that during the conversion of the document from the Word document to the InDesign, which we felt would make it easier for everyone involved in future updates, there were some problems with some of the graphs and some of the tables, some transposition of some of the information, and the graphs didn't come out quite right. So we made an addendum that we gave to the Planning and Zoning Commission. What I propose to do, now that we have identified, I think, all the problems in the original publication of the public hearing draft, republish the new version with those corrections, give it to the TAC, the Assembly, and the Policy Committee, so they have a clean copy when they finally review it and make their final decision and approval. So that's probably what we needed to know, or wanted to know.
Are there any questions or comments from the committee?
When do you think that would happen, the printing of the?
I understand from the consultants that they'll have the final edits completed by tomorrow. So I think I could probably get some copies printed early next week.
And the correct version, though, is posted online right now?
No. Those additions have not been posted online. I don't want to, I could have posted the addendum, but I didn't want to confuse people by looking at the addendum and then figuring I'll be able to post it in Monday, the clean version. I'd rather just post the clean version one time and have it done with, and not have any reference to an addendum. But
Okay, so you're saying it should be posted by the beginning of next week?
it will be posted probably Monday.
Is that
I wanted to clarify one point that John made, that the concern I heard from the public about the timing was not that they didn't know about the date, but they were notified late that the final version that would be discussed at Planning and Zoning, that notification went out on Thursday and the Planning and Zoning hearing was on Monday. People do not, unlike some of us, go to the website on a daily basis to see when the final version is. So the notice, the final notice of the hearing is important because then presumably the discussion materials are going to be posted. And the discussion materials on the website were listed as being, in some of the chapters, posted on January 3rd, and the hearing was on the 9th. And as we all know, this is a big document. There's a lot of money involved. So not until Thursday did the public know that the final version was up. And that was an important item that people wanted to raise. The public hearing also might be reopened, and I think people should be aware of that for the next Planning and Zoning Commission. Also, the transposition of the numbers, that was noticed and by a number of folks who were looking at the Kinnick Bridge information. It was discovered by the public. It took some time to say, are these new numbers? And to contact people over the weekend to try to get the clarification. So the public, having the public view this over an appropriate time period makes a lot of sense, because the addendum resulted from one of the errors that the public found. Maybe there were other errors too. But I would like to see what the whole addendum was, because wasn't able to comment on it at the Planning and Zoning hearing because I didn't know all the changes. And then finally, I have a question for John, having seen the final version that was posted. And it's specifically related to the Kinnick Crossing project, the short-term project 140, the long-term project 218. It doesn't list the number of lanes associated with the project. So the $702 million cost estimate, I believe that's for a 2-lane crossing. And the $230 million cost estimate, I believe, is also for the connection to Ingra Gamble. So the 4-lane crossing cost doesn't appear to be in the document. Is that correct?
I'm going to have to refer to Judy to answer that. I think this question has come up a number of times in the past to the TAC. It's not a new issue. I know Jamie Kenworthy has mentioned it, but
It's a question for AMATS, I think, because this is an important question that has to be answered. And we need to be able to say definitively, and the description does not include a 2-lane or 4-lane. So we need to have that written here in order to have comments made on this, and to ensure it's consistent, the revenue numbers are consistent. So I'm not sure it's a Kabata question anymore. It's become an AMATS question.
Well, what I was just saying was I would rather have the answer from the consultants than from Nevada, because we need to know, we need to verify this.
From these consultants? What consultants? Our
Project team.
consultants?
The project, yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's fine.
Well, I mean, we are working closely with Tabata, and we rely on Tabata substantially to give us a description of it. And my understanding is that the cost estimate does anticipate that there will be a 4-lane.
Can we write that down if it is? If it does not, because the independent cost said 686 million for a 2-lane road. And so 702, I'm fine with that. Ingra Gamble connection is 230, I'm fine with that. Where does the 4-lane paving come in? And I think these descriptions need to be accurate and not vague. This is page 724. Everyone else. It's going to jump out at everyone. We need to be as clear as possible. And AMATS needs to know what we're putting out and what we're sending to the Federal Highway Administration. We can't be vague about it. Because we're talking about, you know, something more than $100 million, which means that other projects won't happen unless we get these numbers right.
For me, I'm looking through the text to see where it is we had addressed that. I do recall it actually, where did you find it?
732, the middle section.
Page 732?
Yeah, page 732.
What about 724 is the other question I have.
Yes, Bart, would you please read that?
Says phase 1 includes a minimum 2-lane roadway at the beginning, and then halfway down it says the expansion of the bridge and roadway from 2 to 4 lanes within phase 1 construction limits will be the responsibility of the private developer, who has the option to construct these additional lanes at any time, provided they are in place at such time traffic volumes warrant. And then, if you read further, phase 2 says that includes the 4-laning of the Ingra Gamble extension and the Burma Road to Fort McKenzie.
Okay.
732, the new document.
Okay, I don't have that, but I do have page 724. Can we, are you saying, Bart, that the description for long-term project 218 includes 4 lanes? Because that's not in the description now.
If I may correct it, the phase 1 includes the 4-laning of the bridge.
Then the cost number's wrong, the 702.
No, the 702 includes the widening of the bridge to 4 lanes. And it says here, it says, because the work is included in the initial contract, it is considered short-term for the purposes of the MTP. I mean, we did describe in here that the 4-laning is short-term.
Jennifer, the problem I have with that is the DOT hired a contractor to do a cost estimate, and the number that came out was 686, and that was only for 2 lanes. So there's description, but there's a conflict here, because it only says 702 million for phase 1 on page 724.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a comment or is it going to just beg more questions, but we kind of had some of the same, what turned out to be semantics issues with the approach to the bridge. Is it 2 lanes and you can't go anywhere to the side of the 2 lanes, or is it going to get constructed to allow for 4 lanes, but you'll start with 2 and have big shoulders that you can turn into 2 extra lanes and a bike path later? There might be the way it's being described is confusing versus we got to go back and add bridge and piling and 2 more lanes later. I think there's a disconnect there, and I'm just not sure if I'm totally right on that.
Consistent with the tables.
No, that's just a comment. It's just a comment. I mean, or a rhetorical question. Not looking for an answer. Just remember getting into that kind of a discussion with those guys ourselves. And I thought my walk-away understanding was wide enough for 4, starting with 2, big shoulders on both sides in case the traffic volumes require you to add an extra lane in both directions later. Plus, there'll be room aside for a bike path. That's what I just seem to remember, and I could very well be wrong.
Madam Chair, I don't think we can resolve it today, but I think Ms. Bostein is point on. Because the rest of our tables basically say we have a project, 122, whatever, make up a number up from point A to point B, and we describe the cost, whether or not it's going to be in pedestrian facilities, what the type is. I think we have the number of lanes in there. And if that's what we're doing, then what we can do is we can write it's a 2-lane facility, and then we'll discuss it. And if $702 million not a 2-lane facility, then let's figure out if it's 3 or if it's 4. I just think her point is, the rest of the projects, we have description of the number of lanes. In this table on this page, we don't. So let's just figure out what it is and make it right.
And I think we do, Madam Chair, Liz, I think we do have the information to make that clarification. If 724 as a standalone table is a problem, let's amend it, because I believe that 702 million is for 4 lanes ultimately. Whether or not those 4 lanes are built at the beginning, or whether it's
In the short time frame, I don't think the issue is whether it's done initially or, first 5 years and then 10 years. The point is the 702 4-lane job. And if it is, say 4 lanes.
We can confirm that with Kabata here,
But-
that is.
Jennifer, DOT did a study, and the independent contractors cost $100,000, said that 2 lanes would only cost $686 million. How could 4 lanes cost $702 million? That's what I'm asking.
Okay.
And that's where we have a technical expert here, but the difference between those two, when you already have everything else in place, going from 2 to 4 lanes, it's my understanding, is incremental and not exponential in terms of cost.
But it's not less than 20 million either for a bridge
Well,
lane.
let's direct that question to Kabata, because this is something the Budget Oversight Committee dealt with extensively in getting these numbers to align with what was presented to Kabata as part of the reform.
I'm really concerned that we're misrepresenting the numbers here. And I think and I say that cautiously, and I think as engineers, we need to be very careful here and not be fuzzy and be as explicit. If we're going to put 2 to 4 lane, the number 702, that it doesn't have technical credibility. We need to know, especially since DOT did its own analysis of cost, whether this 702 million is going to fund 4 lanes. And I would posit that it is not.
Okay, I would like to pose the question to Kabata to answer specifically, because we have been around this and around as part of, the tables and financial constraint analysis, doing the best we could to represent a very complex project as a very different funding approach than anything else that we're faced with. And so, that being said,
The cost estimate that Sebastian is referring to is cost estimate as if you would approach a project if it were going to be a design bid build. It's a very different deal when you've got a P3 type of structure. The 702 million is the cost of capital that is from the pro forma that we've been referencing throughout this whole document. 702 million is expected to be the price of the deal with the private partner. It says in the document here that, the subgrade has to be built up, the in-water work all has to be done under phase 1. The roadway width has to be wide across the bridge, 10-foot shoulders, so it's a 44-foot roadway to eventually be expanded to a 66-foot roadway. All of that, you know, we've had this discussion a hundred times. We have an $82 million contingency, and that's $702 million. You know, it's in there. We have no reason to try and lowball the price for the purpose of this plan, because we want our estimate to be conservative enough that we're gonna have a deal at the end of the day. So there's absolutely no reason for us to try and lowball the cost of the project for the purpose of the plan.
So bottom line, it looks, we need to clarify the project description on table 7, on page 724, to make it more clear as to what's being included in the cost estimate. So that's what I'm saying. Mr. Hanson?
Judy, what you're saying is that under phase 1, we're building a 4-lane road and not paving it 4 lanes. And basically, what's gonna happen is you're starting out with 2 lanes, and then you're just gonna put asphalt on it, or with some modifications after that.
For a large portion of the project, yes. The tunnel will be built with 6 lanes, only 2 lanes will be open initially. The roadway embankment through, from the tunnel to the bridge abutment will have to be built up to the bottom of the asphalt. The same with the Point McKenzie side. The in-water work all has to be done. We don't want to have to go back and do a lot more construction in the port area either. That's why we're building the grade wide and paving, you know, a narrower width. The developer, Fairway, he might decide to just pave the whole width when he's there the first round, you know, who knows?
Probably
The bridge
cheap.
structure itself, the substructure will be 4-lane, all the in-water work done. Deck work will have to be a minimum of the 44 feet. So 22 feet will have to be added on.
And it sounds like that's an easy enough description to make, that, and I don't have any problem with describing it that way if that's not the way it's really, if there's some confusion, like Steve was saying, on semantics between 2-lane and 4-lane, it's just we're building it to full width,
Pretty much.
pretty much, except
The Port
We're
McKenzie
paving it.
side is this section across the way. It'll be the 2-lane structure because it'll eventually be a, you know, median divided, depressed median divided roadway. So 3 miles on the other side of the arm will be brand new construction when the capacity improvements are required.
then let's get the appropriate language and move on.
Okay, Ms. Epstein, this is the last time. before we
Sure,
move on.
that's fine. And I'm glad you clarified that, Jerry, because that's my understanding, that's what's in the pro forma, that it's only 2 lanes with a 4-lane substructure. The one point I want to make to this group is that the revenue from a 36,000 AADT, which is going to need to have 4 lanes, is included. So the cost of that paving needs to be included as well. Because that's the cost, the revenue numbers that Cabata has given us. So we don't want to have the high traffic revenue numbers and not have a road that has sufficient capacity to carry that traffic.
We do. I mean, it is accommodated here in the short term. The short-term project accommodates 4 lanes. That's what this whole conversation has been.
The substructure, not the paving.
Yes, yeah.
No.
When the traffic volumes warrant, the developer will have to widen the roadway.
At his cost.
Yes, it's all in there.
But that's not the 702 million.
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Jerry, didn't we just say that the cost of the 2 lanes and the 4-lane substructure is what is in phase 1 right now, and that's what the description is going to say?
It's the cost of the contract with the developer is the
Yes.
702 million.
It's not the contract with the developer, this is construction
It is.
cost. This is construction costs that we put in here. That's how we put it for every other project, not the cost with the developer.
This is a different project. different type of project rather than all the other ones.
It's a 35-year contract.
It's
not just,
Is this number the capital cost or not?
Yes.
700.
For building 4-lane road?
Yes.
Yes, that's what my understanding is, 700.
A paved 4-lane road?
Yes.
And that's not my understanding based on all the documents I've reviewed from Capata. So that's where
That
I'm
was my
concerned.
understanding.
Well,
That's all.
we need to
Okay.
move on so we can
Yeah.
actually finish the meeting. I guess the point is that within the document, it's clarified as far as the cost and where it's coming from. And maybe
I'd be happy to help with that language.
Do we want, does it need to be done before this gets reposted? Is clarification?
Just,
That's part of the process.
but I think before we act and make a recommendation to the policy committee, after P and Z and after the assembly, we'll see what other comments they come up with before we recommend it to the policy committee. That's my recommendation.
But the text does address the
But
short-term.
this has to
numbers.
address it
It's
too.
in the text, it's not in the table.
It has to be in the table.
Okay, we can make that as part before adopting it. I mean, that was my question to the body. Do we want to do that now?
Could we add a sentence,
Add a sentence.
a reference to page such and such?
We could.
And then-
Lance was saying, no, we didn't think we needed to do that now.
That's too much.
We need the number of lanes in the table.
Okay, quick recommendation.
I found some errors in the table as well. There's pathway that's neglected to be mentioned in the table that needs to be in there, and I think the length of the roadway is incorrect, and some of the description of phase 1 says it goes to Vermont. There's a few little things that need to be cleaned up. And I've made those comments to the PC.
John, will those changes be reflected in the draft that's up?
I would recommend that we make, like, I agree with Lance, that there'll be other issues that we'll want to comment to the policy committee, changes that will come up. And I would package them all together and forward it to them. At this point, would we do a date on the table for the planning and zoning commission? Is another addendum? I mean,
The
our
public's
plan
going to
is-
comment.
What's that?
We should have all the changes. If the public's going to comment, if planning and zoning is going to comment, they should have all the changes.
There'll be more changes, I'm sure, when the assembly takes a look at it. They'll make recommendations for changes also, so it's not like it's going to be the only change that the policy committee is going to have to look at. But, I mean, we could continue making changes every week if we want to, probably, and, because I think that's what we end up doing, but you have to respond to every.
One thing to keep in mind is that all of these other bodies, including this body, are all advisory to the policy committee. So any changes that are made while you're creating this document, if the policy doesn't agree with them, then they're not approved. So if you change it along the way, you may be changing it back. Because you guys are all, everyone's advisory to the policy committee, they make the final decision. So they change things a lot along the way.
all of the revision just needs to be included before it goes back to policy committee. Make that suggested revision. Anyways, we've had the committee discussion. Before we move on, are there any other questions or comments from the public? Nope. All right, then we're on to item 5B, the tip major amendment number 3.
Mark's going to do this part, that's a change to the last one.
Last month, this committee released the TIP Amendment 3 for public review and comment period. During that time, revisions to the STIP, Statewide Transportation Improvement Program, adjusted the fiscal year 13 AMATS allocation. It essentially went from $20 million to $36 million, so we had to program an additional $16 million in FY13. So what we did is we brought the whole amendment back. We've added these revisions to the previous ones we've already discussed. So I think for today, I'll highlight what's changed in 13, unless somebody has a specific question on another one. But on the first page, we're looking at the tip table. That's where we adjusted the amount. If you go about halfway down, you see that $36,309,000 we're expecting the same numbers in 12 and 13, so that's what I just talked about, the additional $12 million. If you skip back to table 3, the third page, where that money went, third project down, Eagle River Road rehab. We originally had that AC'd from 14 to 13 to 12. The additional money allowed us to put all the money in 13 to advance construct that into 12. So the plan is to fully fund Eagle River Road rehab in 12 using the borrowed money from 13 now with that extra money. And then further down, we added some money to Dowling Road extension. That is for phase 2. That supplements a $6.8 million earmark and $9.5 million in GF money, general fund money. Still not enough to fully fund that project, but it is enough maybe to do some utility work and to get us a step closer. And then this committee has the option of adding more money in the future years, maybe to AC, depending on what our allocation is. But that is where the majority of the changes went on table 3. If you go to table 4, this is our transportation enhancement table. We did adjust a 2012 number. We upped the number for the Glen Highway Trail rehab based on latest estimates. It went from 4.7 or 4.8 to 5.1. And then we added a little bit of money for the area-wide trails rehab and the bike plan project. Those are for those initial $100,000 projects that were funded in 2011 that are running extremely over budget, noting that the federal process for these small $100,000 projects may not be the way to go, because we're now going to spend about $250 instead of the original $100. So lesson learned, and we'll move forward with that. Table 5, there were no changes. Table 6, we adjusted the project description for the Seward Highway. What was the H2H connection reconnaissance study is now the Seward Highway, Tudor Road, and 20th Avenue. There is no money, federal fund money in the STIP right now, the draft STIP. That is because in the draft capital budget, there is money in there, but because this only reflects federal funding, we zeroed it out, but it is now GF, or planned to be GF money. Table 7 had no changes. Table 8, we updated some of the earmark descriptions and money left over and added some numbers that are easy to identify within DOT if you're looking these up. Some of them have changed or been reappropriated. For example, the C Street Railroad bypass was C Street construction phase 4, so that was clarified. And then project number 12, the Providence Hospital Public Access Road was reappropriated Dowling Road, and that's that $2.5 million earmark I mentioned earlier. So the other descriptions were updated on that table.
Wait, Bart. Project number 20, were you able to confirm the
Oh.
funding source for that idea?
Yeah, thank you. There are 2 changes. Project number 20, where it says that state GF is actually federal STP funds, and the same for project 21 on the next page, where it says state GF should be federal STP funds. And also, the Kennegarm Crossing ones in the STIP no longer list illustrative. So we added that last time. We probably need to delete that word this time on projects 3 and 4.
Which table?
Table 8, funding sources for projects 3 and 4. The red text that was added during the last amendment, that illustrative, we probably just need to delete that.
And confirm that, and these numbers reflect what's in the latest.
The numbers are what's in the latest STIP. Also noting that the STIP is still not finalized, so there may be some minor adjustments.
We're dealing with, since the reauthorization is so uncertain, is that headquarters out of Juneau has gone ahead and has carried forward the federal fiscal year 12 assumptions into 13. And so that's a pretty substantive difference for AMATS and go through. Because basically it's increasing the program by 1/3. And so it's, I guess it's fortuitous that we have some very large projects that we're requiring multiple years to fund. That gives us the flexibility to absorb those. those funds. But it's a little bit of a, I want to say schizophrenic time, but just a lot of uncertainty on future, forecasting future federal funds is very, very difficult.
So Bart, on
I don't know
the,
if we're done with the presentation, so I think we still have.
go ahead, Bart, I'm sorry.
We're pretty close. I was
Okay.
just
I'm sorry.
There's no more changes on Table 9, and then on Table 10 in the pavement replacement program, we just adjusted the starting point on project number 7 to reflect the actual project that we have going right now. It's starting at new Seward rather than old Seward, so that's it.
So Bart, on the NHS system, so all of the increases that AMATS is receiving in the AMATS area is all in the CTP tract. Basically, that's where it's all coming from. We've got no increases in the NHS.
No, that's in the STIP right now. No.
All right, so on Table 6, on the NHS, take project number 3, you said that one there, there's a seeking state general funds for that one?
Yeah, in the draft capital budget and in the draft STIP, it is listed. Let me pull it up here real quick.
The reason I ask is I think it might be worthy to say in the text, even if it's in parentheses, project seeking state GF funds for completion of this project or in state legislative session 2013. So in legislative, Table 6, Project 3, Seward to Tudor to 20th on the Seward Highway.
We've had similar language before, your project is supplemented by state GF or positive state GF.
Yeah, we do have that.
I think it's worthy because at the end of the day, the legislators get a copy of this document. We were supposed to send it to them in January. I think that's what our process is when we get our TIP approved. And when they get it, it would be nice for them to see that it's in there. Policy committee has ultimately approved that. So just as a suggestion.
So we could say possible GF, maybe show that 10 million and 13.
Whatever.
Well, I think we
whatever the
just
request
added all
is.
in the text, the possible
in the
$10 million GF in
13?
in 13, if that's okay.
That would be.
I'd be more positive than saying possible money. I would say legislative request for 2013 dollars.
Or just say general fund request.
General fund, whatever. I think Craig's right. Because in the past, we've had projects that we've chased federal money, and then we decided to change the source, but the only way then the numbers go away, and people want to know what happened without a description. So we got. Thank you, Bart.
Yeah.
Stephanie.
Before we get to you, I just want to say really quick, it is now 4:18. Technically, we're supposed to stop at 4:30, but we do have one more item after this. Actually, two. We have the obligation report and the OSNHP. And Erica was here last month, and she's been waiting very patiently, so I wanted to ask the committee if they're willing to stay a little long so we can actually see that final.
For Erica, I would. If it was John, I'd be up.
Thanks, Lance. Does anybody have? All right, thank you. Sorry, something with it.
Quick question, Bart, I may have missed this, but why were the words illustrative removed from the Kinnick crossing? It's my recollection this is different than the illustrative projects that we were talking about. This was something that FHWA had requested we put in. Ms.
Right.
Rosenberg, what's on the phone?
There were communications and discussions back and forth between the state headquarters and FHWA on how to show this project in the STIP. So we were trying to reflect what was going to be shown in the STIP. They have since changed how they're showing it in the STIP and showing it as actual funding through a variety of funding sources. And they have removed the illustrative part of the STIP with FHWA's okay. And so we're just simply mirroring what's in the STIP.
Any other questions or comments on this major amendment number 3 from the committee? Are there any questions or comments from the public?
Madam Chair, I move the draft major amendment number 3 to the 2010-13 TIP be recommended for approval of the policy committee.
We actually need to release it for another 30-day public comment period because the adjustments and the funding are so large that we need to put it out again for 30-day public comment period.
So let me ask you a question then before. We are not adding more projects. We're not taking projects out. public review is of the projects. The only difference is we're going to do them faster. So we have to do that for another 30 days.
Because we're adding money and we're adding them to existing projects. If there's a variety of projects we could be adding that money to, the public should have an opportunity to weigh on. And in the regs, large adjustments in funding allocations.
Well, let me ask you another question. Do we have to do it for the whole TIP? I'm particularly interested, here's the reason I'm asking.
Because of
the earmark, we, on table 8, we applied for and received an FTA grant to replace the roof. We cannot bid that job until it's in an approved STIP and an approved TIP. If we have to wait to do that, we won't be able to get it started. And so, if that was the reason I was thinking, if that table did not change, or other tables did not change, and the only tables that changed was 3, 4, and 5, maybe we just release 3, 4, and 5 for a review, and not 7, 8, and 9. So, I would just ask for the committee's thoughts on that. That was my interest in
As part of a major amendment, after this committee approves recommendation, it has to go to the P&Z and Assembly before it can go to the Policy Committee. So we'd be essentially doing that twice. So I just want to make the committee aware of that, that it would be, we'd have to go to the 2 separate occasions a month between each other.
So we have to go out for public review?
On the changes between what was out there, so that was not part of the changes, so it's up to this committee if you'd wanted to go that route and separate what was in the first public review versus what's been changed now and do 2 separate amendments is what it would be.
Craig, do we have the ability to split the TIP and just put out the parts of the TIP that were changed for an extra 30 days? Or do we have to do the whole package and get them review the things that aren't changing?
Well, I think we'd either have to do 2 separate ones. We'd have to start a new process because this is a major amendment. It's not an adjustment. And I think since we added that, we added the project in, the transit one, you can't do an add and mod when you're adding a project. It's not usually.
I mean,
the only thing I can think of is that P&Z usually wants to get the document after the public comment period is closed. And we can get it done beforehand. That's with the previous chairs, so I felt that way.
And I think how you would move forward if you were going to separate out is you would approve TIP Amendment 3 as presented in the public review draft and then release what is TIP Amendment 4, all the changes I just discussed here for a 30-day public comment.
Right.
Run them concurrently.
Yeah, they'd just be a month apart, a month behind each other.
Yeah, it happens with the study.
A month is a month. I mean, we're not going to review the process for a month. It's just, the projects we're adding, we don't have to do a new conformity. We don't have to do an environmental document. We don't have to do, we're not adding projects. We're not changing the scope. It just seems ridiculous that we have the ability to advance projects and we have to,
Well,
it's that federal process.
I guess one thought is that, I mean, this is similar to the, when we did the 2009 amendment to the RFP, and we originally didn't think that it was a substantive difference, and let's go through, and obviously we got sued because someone else thought it was a difference and needed another 30 days.
Okay.
We decide this is a major change between the First Amendment.
I'll withdraw my motion.
We decide to put it out as it is. But the major difference is just the dollar figures.
Jill, did I get a second? Good.
Second. Oh.
You withdrew before she seconded.
Somebody else can make the same motion.
There was a motion.
The motion was to pass it on to the policy committee, then the request is to put it out for public review.
Somebody like to make a motion?
She's chair.
You want me to?
Well,
I'll move.
Okay, so
we have.
So-
Wasn't figuring out what was going on.
She's looking for somebody to step up, and I was just
know.
watching for something else to go to bat.
And she's acting chair. I thought I was waiting for her to make a motion.
No.
Why don't you just do it? So we have a motion, we need a second.
I need a second, yes.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor to release the TIP amendment for 30-day public review and replace what's out there right now. Is that correct? And is there a friendly amendment to incorporate the changes that Bart walked us through, which was to change those 2 projects from state GF to the ITS projects to showing federal funds, and to add the language about GF,
Project through incentive system.
yes, the $10 million for state funds. Discussion?
Hold on, Jennifer, if I may. Greg, would we be in error if we just pulled out those tables which AMATS does not approve, which is the earmark tables? We can't, the reason we're putting it out is because we've got more money, and the purpose of the comment is to find if we're putting the money in the right place. These pages, what are they, 8 and 9, 8, 9, and 10? Are those projects that actually, if the public comments in and says, no, you can't spend the earmark on that project, you have to spend it on another project? You really can't do that.
We don't control those tables. They're not part of our allocation. Well, 10 is.
Well, I'll try it. I'm going to make a friendly amendment to the motion to pull out tables 8, because we made changes to 6. No. But if we do this part before I finish this, do I have to, if we release, can we actually separate Amendment 3 to just approve tables 7, 8, and 9 without having to do an Amendment 4?
You would still have, you want to approve,
He's trying to get the changes in 8 approved.
Now.
Transit stuff now, and everything else can wait, because there isn't any great.
Well, not only can it wait, the public comment that we've gone through, the purpose we're putting it out again is to find out if we're putting money in the right spot.
Right.
Tables 8 and 9.
Right, there's no money being moved around, there's no
You
change in
can't.
dollar figures.
You can't do anything with them. Public comment's already done. So I move we separate tables 8, 9, and 10, and recommend those to the policy committee for approval.
I did change the illustrative. I don't know if people want to comment on that.
Oh, okay.
I'll second it.
For 2 things, I want to be able to make sure that we can move the projects forward, that nothing can change. And I want to be true to the public process to make sure that we're following our own procedures, but we're going to wait. We won't get on planning and zoning in January. We won't get on, probably lucky if we get in February. And then the assembly is going to have to act on this thing. I'll be in May. I won't be able to put a bid document on the street until June, so I won't get the roof done on the barn. That's my dilemma. That's my dilemma, guys. So that's what I'm trying to solve.
All is moved, and seconded.
Yeah.
Including the friendly amendment. Okay.
I was on the friendly amendment.
He started a friendly amendment, didn't finish a friendly amendment.
I'm sorry, Joe. My friendly amendment was to, I thought I said to remove tables 8, 9, and 10 and forward those to the policy committee for approval.
Without it going to P&Z?
No, I mean, it went to P&Z. We'd send it next to planning and zoning. I mean, if I wanted it to go to planning and zoning, we might as well just send the whole thing to them.
Oh, I see, just take out.
I want to separate it and, put this part back out for public review. And I don't know why we don't even do 7 and send it to the policy committee.
Let me walk through the process for 1 second to make sure that I have it clear, so when I do review minutes. There was a motion out there, you withdrew your motion.
Then there was a motion to move it to the planning and zoning.
Right.
Steve seconded it.
Right.
I'm asking for an amendment.
Friendly amendment to
Pull out
those tables
and forward those to the policy committee.
and forward those to the policy committee.
And the rest of it's still going to the clinic.
And the rest of it is still going to go to the planning committee. I just want to be clear. So.
That's my intent.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, so when I ask if there's any objections, are we saying to the friendly
The friendly
amendment?
amendment.
Okay.
Which table?
I seconded it, but I just have a question to Craig and Bart. When we do this, is there anything? It's my only question.
I think we probably could. I need to go back and reread the regs to make sure. Lance is right, this is our unconstrained, unfinancially constrained portion of the SIP that we don't control the funding for. I think it'll work. I would recommend not moving table 10 because that is an AMATS controlled table.
Yep.
But I would say contingent on being okay by the federal regulations, which I think it might be.
Whatever the policy committee takes that.
Yeah, I mean,
next meeting.
I can work on that. Figure that out. I don't foresee any problems right now.
Which tables again?
It would be, my motion was 8, 9, and 10. Based on Bart's counsel, if it's okay with the second, I'll just forward 8 and 9.
Yes.
So are there any objections to the friendly amendment for tables 8 and 9 to the policy committee while forwarding the rest of it to P&Z for the 30-day public comment? Is that pending?
Pending Bart's review.
Pending Bart's review.
Could I ask a question? Could we advance 7, 8, and 9 and keep the tip intact? Or just say, yep, just advance it, so we're not going to separate it.
Right.
Yeah.
Is that?
That would be okay.
That would be
Steve.
preferable.
That would be fine.
Split.
I would be fine with that as well.
Yeah, yeah.
It's 8 and 9.
8 and 9.
Advance 8 and 9.
Mm-hmm. Just
All right.
advance 8.
All right. Are there any objections? Hearing none, we are so moved.
No objections on the
That
friendly
amendment,
amendment.
the friendly amendment.
And then you have to move on the whole motion as amended.
Yes, so, okay, the amendment has been accepted, so now we're, the overall motion, which I wasn't here for part of it, so I'm sorry, I don't know what all of it is. What was all the motion?
The main motion was to release the tip for public review. It's by Steve, it's seconded by Steve.
Kim.
Okay, okay, so that's the overall motion with the friendly amendment. So it's gonna move this to second. Are there any opposed? Hearing none, we are so moved.
That's it for you, Bart. Thank you.
I know.
Obligation report.
Oh, no. The next item, actually, I was gonna ask, do you mind if we do the OSNAP before we do the obligation report? I know, okay. All right, then we're gonna shift to item 6. I guess before we go on though, are there any other business items? Before we move on to the rest of it? No? All right, then, you're on there.
Thank you so much for staying late to hear this. My name's Erica McConnell. I'm a AMATS planner of the transportation planning section. And when I started about 10 months ago, I took over the revision to the official streets and highways plan that was started by Juan Lee, who had left. There is a packet that was distributed to all of you, and I just wanted to run through what's in that packet. You have the draft of the official streets and highways plan. You have the staff report that was written from the Planning and Zoning Commission. You have a chart of proposed classification changes between the 2005, the existing current OSNAP, and this revision. we have the public comment matrix, and that is the comments and the response to comments that we received in time to create that matrix for the Planning and Zoning Commission, and that includes comments up to the end of October. And then the last thing is the Planning and Zoning Commission's approved amendments. They recommended these amendments at their meeting of November 7th. So that's what's in your packet. There have been some additional comments that we received after the end of October, and I will be updating, I'm in the process of updating the comment matrix in order to take it to the assembly, which we'll be doing in the next month or two. Spence, you're looking puzzled. Do you have questions? Okay.
No, I'm waiting for you to get to the question I have.
Okay. The official streets and highways plan is an element of the municipal comprehensive plan. It sets the functional classification of streets within the municipality and describes their general function and characteristics. We're generally talking about collectors, arterials, expressways, and freeways. By default, the roads that are not classified as one of those four things are then classified as local streets. It also includes two optional design designations, the country lane, which used to be, I think, a functional classification. We've kind of pulled out. It's no longer a functional classification. It's a design option that can be applied during the design process of a road. And then also the rural collector, which is a design for a collector that we've heard desired both in the Chugach-Eagle River area and on the hillside, something that reflects more the characteristic of the rural area. May not be as wide, may not have as many pedestrian facilities. This OSNHP also includes the street typologies. They were pretty much lifted from the current LRTP. There were a few minor modifications, but we pulled them into the official streets and highways plan. And you might recall in the UPWP that you approved within the last 2 months that there is an upcoming project to designate the streets within the collector and higher streets within the municipality, to designate them with a street typology. So basically to create a street typology map, and that is something that's called for in the comp plan. And then finally, there are some small scale transportation study areas called for within the OSNHP. There are some areas within the municipality, and all the ones that are in this OSNHP are in Chugach-Eagle River, where there's not enough information at this time to determine what is the appropriate network of higher classification streets. And so when development does come to that area, or for the most part, when we're talking about vacant areas, there will be some sort of transportation study done to determine what is the need for collectors, what is the need, if any, for arterials for that particular area. So the major changes that are between today's OSNHP from 2005 and this one are, they're basically three major changes. Two I've already mentioned, the street typologies and the study areas. And the third is just changes to the classification of various streets in the maps and tables. What I feel is a significant change, although it may not be noticeable to that many people, is bringing consistency between the maps and the tables. In our current one, there's things that are on the maps that aren't in the tables, and there's some confusion, and so I've worked really hard to make sure that's consistent, that all the streets are match the official street name from the addressing official and that sort of thing. Many local streets have been upgraded to collector. We've added collectors that were called for in the Hillside District Plan, and we've incorporated projects from the current LRTP. There are some things in the draft MTP that are not in the OSNHP, and so there will need to be amendments made to this, and there aren't very many, but there will need to be some amendments made to the OSNHP after the MTP is adopted to bring them into consistency. Yes?
Were there any, did this exercise or this update eliminate any previously designated collector roads?
I'm gonna check the table, because I think I would have marked that down.
Eliminate, pull down or to just get rid of the connection. There's some condition on the path. Oh, And that is part of the public process that they eliminate.
Well, there were a couple that we had proposed we had proposed as part of the update, and then after the public process, we said, okay, that's not what the public wants, and so we took them out again. And there are a couple of them up in the Bear Valley area. So they're not collectors today, but we had proposed to make them, and then we heard a bunch of information that led us to basically change our minds. Other than that, I don't think there is anything that is an adopted collector today that got downgraded.
Any other questions?
Oh, I'm sorry. Vivian just reminded me, there was a change. It's in Eagle River, in the area, study area H. Well, today there's 3 or 4 different collectors there. Aurora Borealis, I forget the names of the other ones, right where Aurora Borealis crosses Peters Creek. There was, for those of you who are familiar with that area, Aurora Borealis on Starner is another street. There's a Starner Street bridge, which is like a 1-lane bridge across Peters Creek, but it's designated today as a collector, and Aurora Borealis is a collector, and it's one of the ways for people from Birchwood to get to Chudiak without going on the highway. There was a proposed second crossing of Peters Creek, and when I went and talked with the Subversa board, they couldn't agree on whether that proposed crossing was reasonable or not. They really couldn't agree on what they wanted to happen in that area, but there wasn't any impetus to actually do anything about it right now, and there was some concern that Aurora Borealis isn't actually in right-of-way. And so basically, in order to solve this kind of conflict where they couldn't even agree what they wanted to happen, we removed, I think, about 4 collector streets from that area and created a study area, so that at such time as the community says, okay, we're ready to figure out, to widen this crossing of Peters Creek and to figure out what's going on with the roads up there, there will be a specific study area that will address where's the best place to cross Peters Creek, because Peters Creek has a lot of flooding, a lot of floodplain flooding issues, and so that would be a place, and thank you for reminding me, where we did downgrade about 4 collectors into local streets.
Any other questions or comments? It was very thoughtful of them.
Where is this in the process of adoption?
It's been through P&Z, and I'm hoping to have it introduced at the Assembly at their last meeting in January for February or March hearing. But there's one issue that I'm waiting for the administration to weigh in on. So I'm happy to tell you about it if you want, but.
Any other questions or comments? Any questions or comments from the public?
No, I
You
had.
still look very thoughtful.
No, the question that I had, I was particularly interested in North UMed access to what the classification was based on the recon study, but I look at Providence, I look at Elmore, the existing street, and I look on the other side, and I just wanted to know if it was the same or similar classification, and it is. That's good. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Eric.
Yeah, thank you for waiting.
Sure, thanks.
Last but not least.
I'll try and make this quick. This is this document here, the colorful one. This is the first quarter. The column in the pinkish purple, depending on your copy, that is the numbers that are in this TIP Amendment 3. So those numbers can't be obligated until TIP Amendment 3 is approved. So you'll see a lot of zeros in the next column of what's actually been obligated in the first quarter. So we're going to mainly focus on the blue column, which is what we anticipate to obligate. And I'll just call out some highlights here real quick. Project, the G2, the second one down Huffman Road, due to construction and utility reunification concerns and overruns, we need an additional $2.5 million. And you'll remember last year we de-obligated about $3 million for this project due to low bids, so now it's coming back, and so we have to obligate it this year. We need an additional $270,000 in construction overruns for Old Glen Highway, and Further down the list, which is halfway down Project 2 Dowling Road, Phase 1, we are de-obligating about $3.8 million based on low bids. So these de-obligations and these construction overruns help balance out the program, so there's no action needed for construction overruns. On the second page, top of the second page are more de-obligations from projects that we are closing out or releasing excess funding for, so those are some more money that's available for the program to cover these construction overruns. Transportation Enhancement Program, we anticipate to obligate what's exactly in the TIP amendment. There are 2 de-obligations listed there at the bottom. On the third page is the continuation of the CMAQ tables. We see nothing different than what's in the TIP amendment. And then some more de-obligations down at the bottom for that category. On the fourth page and the final page, those are the totals. If you look right above the red boxes, it says the total AMATS allocation. In the purple column, that's the 36.3 that we anticipate. If you add up the blue and the green columns, you get about $32 million. So right now, we need to be within 15%. We're within 9% with a $3.3 million difference. If we'll track this further, we don't need to find a project to throw this money at right now. We could have overruns on Dowling, and Eagle River Road can always suck up the money if we have to at the last minute, but we'll be tracking that as it goes. But because there's so many de-obligations right now, we're a little bit underfunded. So just an informational item, nothing to act on. If you have any questions,
Any questions? Any comments? No? Any questions or comments from the public? No? Y'all left? I know, everybody's gone. All right, are there any other final comments from the committee? All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Let's say our next AMATS meeting, the policy committee meeting, will be meeting January 26th, and we're down at City Hall at 1 p.m. And we'll be here again next month, February 9th. I hope to be even when I see you guys.